Today we're going to look at those unique speeches, speeches like I have a dream or ask not what your country can do for you, those memorable milestone speeches that stand out as the high points of American rhetoric. And we want to talk about what makes them unique, what makes them so memorable. And so as we do that, the first thing I want to look at is how language is used. And so we want to look at the denotative and the connotative use of language. The denotative meaning of a word is its literal dictionary definition. This is what the word means. But words often have a secondary level of communication, a secondary way that they touch us. And this is the connotative meaning of the word. The connotative meaning is the emotional baggage that has been packed into a word in addition to its definition meaning. I want to give you an example from our textbook. If you'll excuse me, I'm going to read it to you. The first one I'm going to read is a more denotative type of message. The words mean what they mean. Terrorists do not seek to negotiate with their opponents. They seek victory by using political and psychological pressure, including acts of violence that may endanger the lives of some people. To the terrorist, ultimate objectives are more important than the means used to achieve them. That's pretty straightforward. Let me read you another version that uses words that have a more potent connotative meaning. Terrorists neither listen to reason nor engage in reasoning with others. Their aim is to generate fear, to frighten people into submission. They measure success by the magnitude of the fear they generate through brutal, savage acts of violence. Terrorists are prepared to kill to further whatever cause they claim to be pursuing, and the heinousness of these murders is accentuated by the fact that terrorists murder without passion. They murder with cool deliberation and deliberate planning. They are utterly amoral. Now, both of those passages have the same meaning, but clearly the second passage used language that was weighted with much more emotional baggage. What separates the speeches of someone like Martin Luther King or Robert or John Kennedy from more mundane speakers is their ability to use connotative language, to use language that doesn't only communicate a textbook dictionary definition, but words that speak to us on a deeper, more emotional level. When you listen to I Have a Dream, you are moved by the words that are spoken, and it's because of their connotative meaning. Effective speakers also use language clearly. They use words that are familiar to the listener. They use concrete words. They get rid of the clutter, the verbiage that makes stuff unwieldy and unlistenable. I think one of the chief things that those of us in academia have to be careful of is that we don't fall into the trap of using big words just for the sake of using big words. Now, sometimes those big words are the ones that most effectively communicate what we're trying to say. But I hope as educators that we don't fall into the trap of using big words because big words make us sound more intellectual. To me, the true sign of intellect is being able to communicate with anyone on any level. And so that doesn't mean we use big words. That doesn't mean we use more words than are necessary. That means that we use exactly the right words and only the words necessary to communicate the message. Good speakers use language appropriately. They use language that is appropriate to the occasion, language that is appropriate to the audience, language that's appropriate to the topic. And finally, they use language that is appropriate to the speaker. When you hear a great speaker like Martin Luther King Jr., in any of his speeches, you hear a cadence, you hear a vocabulary that is uniquely Martin Luther King. Same thing with John F. Kennedy. When you read the speeches of Abraham Lincoln, there is an inner voice that they are responding to, that they are channeling as they speak, as they address their audience. Good speakers also use language accurately. If you were to look in a thesaurus, you would find the words education, knowledge, and expertise, each listed as synonyms of each other. But those words have specific meanings. And so a good speaker knows how to pick the word that is most accurate and most appropriate for what he or she is trying to say. Perhaps most importantly, great speakers use language vividly. It goes back to our discussion earlier in this lecture of denotative versus connotative language. A great speaker uses language that creates pictures, that create images in our minds that last. And so we want to take a few minutes here and look at some of the ways that we can use language vividly. Now, one of the ways we do that is through the use of verbal images. First, make sure to use concrete words. These are words that paint vivid pictures in the imagination. I want to read a passage from Ronald Reagan's commemorative speech celebrating the invasion on D-Day at Normandy Beach. And just listen to some of the language he uses. We stand on a lonely, windswept point on the northern shore of France. The air is soft, but 40 years ago at this moment, the air was dense with smoke and the cries of men, and the air was filled with the crack of rifle fire and the roar of cannon. At dawn on the morning of June 6th, 1944, 225 Rangers jumped off the British landing craft and ran to the bottom of these cliffs. The Rangers looked up and saw the enemy soldiers at the edge of the cliffs shooting down at them with machine guns and throwing grenades. And the American Rangers began to climb. They shot rope ladders over the face of these cliffs and began to pull themselves up. When one Ranger fell, another would take his place. When one rope was cut, a Ranger would grab another and begin his climb again. They climbed, shot back, and held their footing. Soon, one by one, the Rangers pulled themselves over the top, and in seizing the firm land at the top of these cliffs, they began to seize back the continent of Europe. That language is very moving, and part of what makes it moving are the descriptive terms, the crack of gunfire, the roar of the cannons, the dense smoke, the cries of the wounded. Those concrete terms are what make that speech memorable. Two other uses of imagery that we use in language are simile and metaphor. A simile is an explicit comparison introduced with the words like or as between things that are essentially different yet have something in common. A metaphor, on the other hand, is an implicit comparison not introduced with the words like or as between two things that are essentially different yet have something in common. Another way to use language vividly is to exploit the rhythm in the language, to find ways to make language rhythmical. One of the ways that we create rhythm in language is through repetition. One of the most obvious illustrations of repetition creating rhythm in language can be found in the first chapter, in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I want to read you a couple of verses. Just listen. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Now, that passage of Scripture is one you've heard all your life, but what makes it unique, what makes it have that special appeal is the rhythm that St. Paul writes into those words by repeating love is, love is not. He creates a rhythmic pattern that makes it almost musical. Another device that creates rhythm in speech is parallelism. Here's an example of parallelism listed in our textbook by the famous Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Rich and poor, intelligent and ignorant, wise and foolish, virtuous and vicious, man and woman, it is ever the same. Each soul must depend wholly on itself. Now, by using those repeated structures, not the same words, but repeated structures, rich and poor, intelligent and ignorant, wise and foolish, that's parallelism. It creates a rhythm just like repetition, but it's done differently. It's not the same words over and over again. It's different words put together in the same structure. Alliteration is another device that creates rhythm. Alliteration is a repetition of the initial sound in a word. A quote from our textbook: "Nothing great is accomplished without cooperation, compromise, and common cause." That's alliteration, that recurring k sound. Cooperation, compromise, and common cause. Now, that quote, by the way, is by Ban Ki-moon. Now, these are just some of the ways that we use language vividly. As you listen to some of the examples we've listed, some of the videos we've put down for you to watch, like I Have a Dream and some other examples, look for other ways that language is used vividly. Think if you can create a list of other things that the speaker does that makes that speech so memorable.